It was a Wednesday evening when Emma walked into my room and sat on the edge of the bed. She was 9 years old, and she had that particular stillness in her movement that in children usually means they are carrying something heavier than what they have learned to carry. She did not come in making noise. She did not announce herself. She sat down, folded her hands in her lap, and looked at me exactly the way her late grandmother used to look at me. Straight, without detours, completely devoid of any need to soften what had to be said. "Grandpa," she said quietly, "Mom and Dad signed something, in your name. They said you gave permission." I stayed completely still on the outside, but on the inside something folded. It did not break from surprise, it collapsed from recognition. If you have ever worked in construction, you know the feeling. It is the exact sensation of looking at a structure and finding the hairline crack you had subconsciously been searching for, finding it exactly where you desperately hoped it would not be. I did not interrogate her. I said thank you and told her to go to sleep. I walked down to the kitchen and stayed alone in the silence, with that sentence refusing to dissolve in the air. They signed something in your name. A 9-year-old girl does not construct a sentence like that out of nowhere. She hears it, she keeps it, and in the end, she cannot hold on to it because her fundamental moral compass dictates that her grandfather has to know. Emma, much like her mother Patricia, possessed an innate inability to live with a truth that should not be hidden. I sat at the kitchen table and began to sift through my memories of the past 12 months. I recalled conversations, uninvited suggestions, and lingering pauses. Each event seemed insignificant on its own, but now, placed side by side, they formed a shape that I did not like. I am 74 years old. I am a retired architect, dedicating nearly 4 decades of my life to the same practice in Indianapolis. I designed buildings meant to outlast the people who funded them. Every time I signed a set of architectural drawings, I knew that every pencil line carried immense responsibility. I lived by the doctrine of structural integrity, and yet the most important structure I ever built was the house I was sitting in. I built this home with my late wife, Margaret. She chose the warm colors and the flow of the hallways. I handled the foundation and the materials. Somewhere between her vision for a family sanctuary and my pursuit of permanence, a true home emerged. Margaret passed away 2 years ago from an illness that did not ask permission from her or from me. I was left alone with the rose garden she had planted, with her collection of novels, and with her favorite reading chair in the corner of the kitchen, a chair where I never sit because it is too much hers to ever comfortably be mine. We had 2 children, Walter and Patricia. Patricia grew up to be fiercely independent, a woman who values transparency above all else. Emma is Patricia's daughter. Walter, my eldest, was different. Walter was eager to please, easily swayed by the prevailing wind in whatever room he stood. Walter married Diane. Diane is a decent woman, but she comes attached to her father, Gary. Gary is a man who possesses an unsolicited opinion about absolutely everything, and a venomous talent for introducing his opinions as though they were your idea all along. He was never outright rude. Instead, he was always present with a polite suggestion that sounded like genuine concern, but had a calculating current moving underneath it. Looking back, the shift began about a year before Emma sat on my bed. It moved step by step, the way insidious things shift when they do not want to be noticed until the trap is fully sprung. Walter asked me once, seemingly out of nowhere, whether my will was up to date. A few months later, he suggested it might make sense for him to have legal access to my bank accounts, just for practical reasons. 3 months after that, he proposed a comprehensive power of attorney. Each time he asked, I firmly said no. I offered no grand explanations, and each time Walter accepted my refusal without anger. He would simply put the papers away and go quiet. But it was the calculating, patient silence of a man waiting for a different angle of attack. That Wednesday night, sitting alone in the quiet kitchen, I mentally placed those isolated moments next to each other. The questions about the will, the request for bank access, the power of attorney, and now Emma's revelation. Together, laid out like a schematic on a drafting table, they possess the undeniable architecture of a hostile takeover. I picked up the phone and dialed Dennis Hartley at 10:15 in the evening. Dennis is not just my attorney. He is an old, trusted friend. I repeated exactly what my granddaughter had told me. Dennis was quiet for a long time. Then his voice came through the receiver, low and serious. "Harold, come into my office tomorrow morning, early. Bring every single piece of paper tied to your name." The next morning I drove downtown. I brought everything. The original property deed from 1988, my last will and testament, life insurance policies and bank statements. I sat across the heavy mahogany desk as Dennis took the documents, put on his reading glasses, and began to review them. He worked slowly, methodically, completely silent. When he finally finished, he raised his eyes. "Harold," he said, his voice steady, "nothing new has been signed without you. There is no active forgery of your signature." I let out a long breath, feeling my shoulders drop. Emma had just misunderstood adult conversation. But Dennis raised his hand, stopping my relief. "Don't exhale yet," he continued, his tone darkening. "I found something else, and it worries me far more than a clumsy forgery ever would." He pulled out a yellow document from 1994. It was a shared property agreement I had signed with my brother Frank decades ago, when we divided our parents' estate. I thought that agreement was legally closed in 2003 when we signed the mutual release, I said, my heart beginning to hammer. "You believed it was closed," Dennis replied, "but it was not. There is a clause in here, a tiny, highly technical stipulation buried deep in a subparagraph that neither you nor your brother read carefully enough. Technically, this specific clause is still active, and under a highly aggressive legal interpretation, it could serve as the foundational basis for a co-ownership claim on this very house." I stared at him. "How does Walter know about this?" "Gary," Dennis said simply. "Gary hired someone who knew exactly what microscopic cracks to look for in your history. And they found this. Gary has been quietly advising Walter and Diane on how to exploit this exact clause. They were actively drawing up the paperwork to file a claim of co-ownership on your property. Emma wasn't wrong. They were signing engagement letters with counsel to launch this claim in secret." He paused, letting the reality sink in. "They were calculating that by the time you received the legal summons, it would be too late and too emotionally exhausting for you to mount an effective defense. They were going to trap you in your own home." I sat in Dennis's office, staring at that dusty 1994 document. I was fiercely, violently angry at myself. For 41 years, I drew architectural plans that had to be precise to a fraction of an inch. Knowing a mathematical error becomes a catastrophic failure in a foundation. Yet my own personal paperwork I had arrogantly left unreviewed for decades. "What do we do now?" I asked. "Now," Dennis said, a fierce glint in his eye, "we close the damn door." Dennis called my brother Frank right then and there. He explained only the legal necessity of permanently extinguishing the rogue 1994 clause. Frank did not hesitate for a fraction of a second. By noon, he had received, signed, and notarized the ironclad amendment that destroyed the clause forever. Before we hung up, Frank asked, "Are you all right, brother? You know exactly where I am if you need me." Short, unembellished. In those few sentences was all the profound solidarity that can be given within a family, without it ever becoming a burden. Dennis then ruthlessly revised my will, installing aggressive, airtight protective mechanisms that left absolutely zero room for proxy claims or future manipulation by greedy in-laws. "It's done, Harold," he told me. "Nobody can ever come in that way again. Your fortress is secure." The confrontation with Walter took place exactly 1 week later. I invited him over on a Tuesday evening, just the two of us, sitting at the same kitchen table where this all began. No witnesses. I poured him a cup of black coffee and looked him dead in the eye. "I know about the 1994 clause, Walter," I said, my voice eerily calm. "I know about Gary's lawyers. I know about the co-ownership claim you were preparing to file against me in secret. And I want you to know that the loophole has been permanently destroyed. It's over." Walter physically shrank. He did not ask how I found out. He lowered his eyes to his coffee cup and was quiet. It was the crushing silence of a truth that can no longer remain unspoken. Finally, he whispered, "Dad, I did not want to hurt you. Gary said it was just a technicality, a way to protect the family assets from inheritance taxes. We were trying to take care of things so you wouldn't have to." "I know you didn't set out to hurt me, Walter," I replied, refusing to let him off the hook. "But wanting something from someone, secretly maneuvering to take it without asking them, is not care. It is theft. Regardless of how neatly your father-in-law attempts to dress up the intention behind it. Looking at him, I did not see an evil mastermind. I saw a man who was fundamentally weak in the wrong moment. I saw a man who stood alongside the wrong, manipulative person, where it was simply easier to bow his head than to stand up and refuse it. Being weak is not the same as being evil, but weakness can cause just as much devastation. 10 days later, the phone rang. It was Gary. He bypassed Walter and called me directly. His voice came through the speaker, dripping with a formal, practiced smoothness. "Harold, old friend," Gary began smoothly, "I am deeply sorry that there has been such a terrible misunderstanding between our families regarding that old paperwork." "Gary," I interrupted, my voice like ice, "there has been absolutely no misunderstanding. A misunderstanding is when someone comprehends a phrase incorrectly. What happened here was that you comprehended my legal standing perfectly, and you decided to actively exploit it. That is an ambush." Gary dropped the friendly act. "I was only trying to secure Walter and Diane's future, Harold. You have to think about the next generation's security." "Walter's future," I said, articulating every syllable with lethal precision, "cannot and will not be built upon the orchestrated insecurity of my present. Do not ever attempt to contact my attorneys again." I hung up the phone. We have not spoken a single word since that day. Patricia, my daughter, found out the truth from me. When I laid out the extent of the betrayal, she was furious. It was the fiery, genuine kind of anger that erupts purely from deep love, the kind of anger that physically hurts to witness. "Why didn't you tell me sooner, Dad?" she demanded, pacing my living room. Because I honestly didn't know what wasn't right until Emma sat on my bed and told me, I admitted. Patricia stopped pacing. The anger drained from her face, replaced by a quiet pride. She told me too, Patricia whispered. She wanted to know if she was allowed to tell you what she overheard Gary and Walter discussing. And what did you tell her? I asked. I told her she absolutely could, Patricia said firmly. I told her that Grandpa needed to know the truth. You raised her to tell the truth when it matters most, I smiled. In the quiet aftermath of the storm, there is a hard truth I have had to face. All my life, I've firmly believed that trust was purely a matter of intrinsic character. You either believe a person is inherently trustworthy, or they are not. I did not understand until I was 74 years old that trust, especially within a family, is deeply dependent on circumstances. A fundamentally good man, placed under the wrong psychological influence, and heavily influenced by a father-in-law who masterfully frames every selfish action as caring for the family, is capable of executing things you would never attribute to him. I was not naive to trust my son. My tragic naivety lay in my failure to see the man standing directly behind him. Dennis, my attorney, told me a profound truth once. He said that family disputes are universally the hardest cases for a lawyer to handle, not because of the legal complexity, but because these cases involve people who genuinely love each other, and who simultaneously do things to each other that, without the confusing veil of love, would have a much harsher name: fraud. Months later, Patricia sat with me on the porch and gently asked how I truly felt about Walter now. I didn't want the words that sounded polite. I wanted the words that were agonizingly accurate. I feel like a man who has lost something he technically still has, I told her. Because Walter is still here. He comes over for holidays. We talk about the weather. But something foundational that existed between us is now permanently questionable. You can walk forward from it. You can build a different kind of relationship on top of the rubble. But you absolutely cannot pretend that the solid, unbroken wall that used to stand between us is the same wall that stands there now. Margaret used to tease me. "Harold," she would say, "you spend your days designing for eternity, but you forget to live for the week." She meant I was always too hyper-focused on legacy and not focused enough on enjoying a simple Tuesday afternoon. This past year, with its labyrinth of careful legal plans, calculated silences, and those 6 quiet, world-altering words from Emma, taught me something Margaret never had to say aloud. It taught me that the true essence of a house is not the geographical address typed on a notarized document. A home is what remains standing when the legal battles end and the storms pass. Today, the documents are in perfect, unassailable order. My fortress is secure. Outside, Margaret's garden continues to bloom in spectacular reds and pinks without ever being asked to. Her favorite reading chair sits proudly in the corner of the kitchen, preserving her memory. A stray, scruffy orange cat that we officially named Chester has moved in permanently. He sits on the kitchen windowsill every single morning, proving to me that sometimes all you really need to do in life is find a place that is warm, safe, and quiet, and simply stay there. And on the front of the refrigerator is Emma's latest drawing. It depicts the house, the blooming garden, Chester the cat, and a grandfather sitting safely in an armchair. Every Friday afternoon, a little girl arrives at my front door. She sits at the oak table I built. She eats scrambled eggs, and she talks endlessly about middle school drama and absolutely everything that a 9-year-old considers vitally worth saying. That is what a home is. It is the peace, the truth, and the unfiltered life that happens inside those walls. Walls whose foundations, after a long and bitter fight, are now truly, permanently clean. Do you have someone like Emma in your life? Do you have someone who tells the raw truth quietly and without an ounce of fear? Someone who possesses the moral clarity to know that the right moment to speak the truth is always right now? Leave me a comment below, share your experiences, and make sure to subscribe to this channel, because every week here we share stories exactly like this one. Stories about fiercely protecting what is rightfully ours, handling betrayal calmly, keeping our paperwork in ironclad order, and doing it all without unnecessary drama. Tell me in the comments, who in your life was that brave voice that spoke up exactly when they needed to speak?